a blizzard prowled through the high country like a hungry animal, swallowing hills, trees, and sky in a single white breath. Snow spun in spirals, hiding every trail and silencing the usual wilderness sounds. The mountains seemed to hold their breath, as if waiting for someone either to live or to disappear beneath the storm. Talon Greyhawk walked steadily through the swirling curtain, with an armful of firewood pressed against his bare chest. His skin burned with cold, yet he moved with the calm control of a man who understood winter as an old rival. Talon had been splitting wood behind his cabin when the wind changed direction, rising sharp and sudden, and he realized that he would have to bring his children inside earlier than planned. Naomi and Mira, his two young daughters, watched him from the shelter of the porch, eyes wide with worry. Their braids fluttered like ribbons in the wind as they clung to each other. Talon knew storms well enough to sense the difference between an ordinary snowfall and a wild, vengeful one. This storm carried the kind of chill that had taken horses and hunters and left them beneath white blankets where the ravens would not find them until thaw. He dropped the wood at the door and opened it so the children could slip into the warmth. The fire hissed with pitch and sap, bright enough to paint the walls with amber light. Before he settled inside, Naomi tugged at his hand, urging him into the yard again. Her voice trembled against the storm. "Dad, something is out there." He wrapped his hide around himself and followed both girls toward the treeline. The wind slashed against their faces while the snow soaked their boots and hems. Myra's small hand clutched Talon's wrist, as though she feared he might vanish as quickly as any stranger swallowed by the white wilderness. Talon crouched near a drift and shielded his eyes with his hand, scanning the clearing. At first he noticed nothing but shapeless mounds and broken branches. Then Mira shouted, "Dad, she's freezing," and pointed toward a collapsed wagon trunk nearly hidden beneath a snowbank. Talon felt his heartbeat shift into a sharper rhythm. People rarely traveled alone in such storms, and no one survived long in this kind of cold without shelter. He hurried forward, the children stumbling after him. Naomi knelt beside the trunk and brushed away the heavy snow. A gloved hand lay limp on the frozen wood. Talon lowered himself and uncovered the face of a young woman, pale and still, her lashes iced as though winter had decided to claim her. Her breathing was so faint it barely lifted her chest. Talon slid his arms beneath her, lifting her with effortless strength. Her body felt fragile and light, like a bundle of twigs wrapped in frost. Naomi pressed close. "She's going to die if we leave her," she whispered. Talon nodded and held the woman against his warmth, shielding her from the slicing wind as best he could. He told the girls to stay behind him and make a path toward the cabin. They trudged uphill through knee-high drifts, guided only by memory, because the storm had erased every landmark. Talon breathed slowly to steady himself and keep panic away. If he slipped or lost direction, the storm would gladly bury 4 hearts instead of 1. Mira began to sob, frightened by the way the horizon vanished. Talon spoke softly over the wind, reminding her that home was not far, and that the fire was waiting. By the time they reached the cabin, Talon's arms burned with cold and weight. The woman's head rested against his shoulder, and he could feel the brittle weakness of her breaths, like the flutter of a small animal trapped beneath ice. Inside, the warmth struck them immediately, melting the frost on their boots and hair. Talon laid the stranger on a thick pile of furs near the fire. Naomi rushed to fetch water, while Mira prepared a pot for broth. Talon rubbed warmth into her fingers. A torn leather satchel lay beside the broken trunk outside, soaked and frozen. Talon retrieved it and set it beside her. He imagined she had walked until she could no longer feel her legs, then collapsed near what little she owned. As the broth simmered, the children sat close to the stranger, whispering prayers they learned from Talon's mother. The firelight touched the woman's cheeks, revealing a softness that reminded Talon of someone before grief had taken his wife. He pushed the memory aside, focusing only on the present heartbeat lying before him. Saving her was not a question. It was a duty that rose above culture and history. Whether settler or Apache, no soul deserved to freeze alone. The storm rattled the cabin walls and howled through the pines. Hours passed, measured by the slow rhythm of the fire, and the steady care Talon gave the stranger. Naomi dipped a cloth in warm water and pressed it against the woman's forehead. Mira whispered that she wished the stranger would wake. At last, the woman's fingers twitched, and an uneven breath escaped her. Her eyelids fluttered like the wings of a fragile bird. She did not speak, yet her eyes opened wide enough to see the glow of the hearth and the children leaning over her. Talon rested a steady hand on her arm. "You are safe," his voice offered, even if she could not yet understand. Outside, the storm raged on as though angered that its claim had been denied. The woman stared into the fire. She blinked slowly, as though searching for proof that this shelter was real. Talon watched her with quiet certainty. Behind her pale eyes lay a history of loss. And though she lay in warmth, something in the soft rise of her breath hinted that winter had not yet released its grip on her fate. Talon woke before dawn, the storm having eased into a soft hush that felt like an exhausted breath across the valley. The stranger slept beneath thick hides, her skin slowly regaining color as the fire lit her features. Naomi and Mira curled beside her like two guardian sparrows, their cheeks pink from the warmth. Talon sat by the hearth sharpening a hunting blade, not because he needed it, but because the motion allowed him to think. He studied the woman lying before him, trying to understand how much suffering she must have endured before collapsing beneath the forest snow. Her clothes were torn, her boots stiff with ice, and her satchel had little more than a crust of bread and a journal with water-damaged pages. Her survival felt like a frail miracle. When the first strip of morning gold slipped in through the shutter, the woman awakened with a faint gasp, as though she had surfaced from beneath deep water. She blinked at the sight of the cabin roof, then at Naomi and Mira, whose dark eyes watched her with quiet hope. She whispered a hoarse greeting, though the words seemed to scrape her throat like gravel. Talon offered her cedar tea, and held the cup for her until she could steady her hands. The tea sent warmth through her limbs, and she leaned back into the furs, sighing like someone who had not felt safe in a long while. Naomi gently asked her name, but the woman's voice faltered. "You may call me Lena," she murmured after a moment, as though speaking the truth of her own identity felt risky. Mira smiled and repeated the name, pleased by how soft it sounded. Talon nodded, glad the stranger could speak at all. He handed her a bowl of broth and asked nothing further. Words would come when her body trusted comfort. The day unfolded slowly, as days often do when silence is more nourishing than conversation. Talon prepared meat and wood for later storms. The children read aloud from a worn book, letting Lena close her eyes while their voices drifted around her like a blanket. She listened with the stillness of a soul that had been chased too long by grief. In the soft light, she seemed younger than when Talon first lifted her from the snow, though her exhaustion left delicate shadows beneath her eyes. As Lena regained strength, Talon noticed how carefully she moved, almost apologetic for every breath she took. She thanked Naomi for every sip of water and thanked Mira for every stitched blanket, even though both girls insisted that kindness did not require permission. Talon admired Lena's humility, but he sensed a deeper wound beneath her gratitude, a feeling that perhaps she expected punishment for needing shelter. That expectation stirred something protective in him, for he understood what it meant to bury pain beneath silence. During the afternoon, Lena attempted to sit upright near the window, looking toward the distant pines where the storm had nearly taken her life. Talon adjusted the hides around her shoulders. She confessed she could not remember how long she had wandered alone before collapsing. She had left her wagon in the foothills, believing she could make it through the forest and reach a trading post before nightfall. She misjudged the weather and her own strength. Hunger and heartbreak had weakened her judgment, though she did not explain the heartbreak. Talon did not push for details. The children remained near her like patient shadows. Mira brushed Lena's tangled hair, humming an old song their grandmother once sang. Naomi wrote small words on scraps of birch bark, teaching Lena how to pronounce Apache phrases slowly and gently. Lena laughed when she mispronounced something, and the girls giggled with her, delighted to hear her voice without strain. Talon watched them with quiet satisfaction. The cabin had not echoed with such gentle sounds since before his wife died. Without announcing it, the girls seemed to need the presence of a woman as much as Lena needed belonging. Later in the day, Lena caught Talon studying her journal, where he had set it to dry on the mantel. She reached for it protectively, and Talon stepped away, apologizing with a nod rather than words. Lena held the journal against her chest, and whispered that she had lost much more than pages when the storm claimed her belongings. Talon understood. A journal could hold memory, dreams, sorrow, and every unspoken chapter that the heart refuses to say aloud. He told her she did not need to explain. She answered with a grateful breath. Evening brought deeper quiet. Snowflakes drifted past the cabin window, softer now, as though winter had resigned its anger. Talon lit more candles and stirred the broth again, letting herbs release their perfume through the room. Lena ate slowly, savoring each spoonful like someone who had not been treated gently in years. After dinner, Talon resumed carving toys from leftover wood, smoothing corners into gentle shapes. Naomi braided Myra's hair beside Lena, who listened to every domestic rhythm with a tenderness that made her eyes shine. As Lena warmed, she revealed pieces of her life in hesitant fragments. Her husband had died the previous winter from pneumonia, leaving her without children or family to steady her grief. She tried staying in town, but whispers grew sharp, and some neighbors treated her as though sorrow made her contagious. She sold what little she owned and set out west to live with her older brother. Yet the journey stretched longer than expected, and her heart grew lonelier with each passing mile. She admitted she had walked into the storm, because she could not bear returning to a world that had no place for her. She expected the storm to finish what grief had begun. Talon listened without judgment. He did not offer pity, for Lena did not need pity. She needed quiet acknowledgement. Lena studied Talon's face, trying to read what he carried behind his calm exterior. She asked about the girl's mother. Talon's breath tightened, though his voice remained steady. She died after an unexpected fever, he said, and some sorrows become part of the house even after the body is gone. Lena lowered her gaze, realizing that the cabin was as familiar with loss as her own life. The fire settled into orange embers, throwing a soft radiance over the room. Naomi drifted to sleep against Lena's side. Mira curled up with her head in Talon's lap, and whispered that she liked Lena, because she smiled with her whole heart instead of her mouth. Lena felt tears rise, though she blinked them away. Talon's children accepted her without hesitation, as if life had silently prepared them for this moment. Lena's expression softened with a complicated emotion she did not name. Even in safety, she feared overstaying. She murmured that she should continue her journey when the weather cleared. Talon did not argue, though the sadness in Naomi's half-asleep sigh revealed how deeply the girls were already attached. Lena looked toward the shuttered window, where the wind pressed against the wood like something determined to return. Just before sleep claimed the cabin, Talon added another log to the fire and glanced at Lena with a question in his eyes. She felt it without hearing it. If she left again, she would feel the cold differently than before, not upon her skin, but inside her soul. She closed her eyes, uncertain whether she feared the storm outside or the warmth within. The night seemed to hold its breath, waiting for morning to reveal the direction her heart would choose. The storm passed, leaving the valley wrapped in bright silence and untouched snow that sparkled beneath a pale sun. A few days of rest had strengthened Lena enough that she could walk short distances around the cabin, wrapped in a heavy wool cloak Talon offered without ceremony. Naomi and Mira stayed close to her side, as if afraid that a sudden gust might steal her back into the wilderness. Lena helped them gather water from the stream, steadying her steps while her cheeks flushed with returning vitality. For the first time since before widowhood, she felt her body grounded rather than hollow, as though life had finally stopped trying to push her toward an unseen cliff. Talon watched her from a respectful distance. He admired how she moved through the forest, without needing to fill the silence with explanations. She listened to the wind brushing through pine needles with the same reverence she used when listening to the children read. Yet every gentle moment also reminded her that safety was temporary, like a warm cup cooling too fast in winter air. She knew the cabin could not be her permanent refuge. When the weather cleared, she planned to continue toward her brother's ranch, even though the thought made something inside her ache with quiet reluctance. The first travelers to cross the valley after the storm were two ranch hands from a distant settlement. They rode through the trees on restless horses, forced toward Talon's cabin by the broken trail and lingering ice. Talon met them at the edge of the clearing. The men asked if he had seen any missing wagons, for word had spread that a settler woman vanished before the storm swallowed the foothills. Talon's eyes did not waver as he told them she was recovering inside. Relief softened their faces until they learned she was staying with an Apache man. One of them muttered that tongues would wag when the news reached town. The other whispered something about impropriety and reputation. Talon remained steady, though he disliked the tone that treated shelter as scandal rather than mercy. The ranch hands rode on, promising to inform anyone searching that Lena lived. Their words vanished into the distance, but their judgment lingered like cold air inside the cabin. When Lena heard what they implied, her cheeks paled. She had known gossip could turn even survival into a story of shame. The idea of neighbors twisting her gratitude into sin unsettled her more than the storm ever had. She whispered that she could leave the next morning, though her body still trembled from weakness. Talon placed a calm hand before her. Winter had not finished with the foothills, and leaving now would be foolish. She nodded, though unease pressed behind her ribs as if another blizzard had begun to swirl inside her. Over the following days, Lena sensed how deeply Naomi and Mira had woven her into their routines. Mira tugged her toward the hearth whenever she felt restless, asking Lena to read stories from her damaged journal. Naomi insisted on teaching her how to stitch moccasins. The children treated Lena as if she had always belonged, and Talon did not discourage their attachment. He moved through the cabin with measured grace, clearing snow from the roof, splitting logs, teaching his daughters to scrub pots with fresh mountain sand. He never asked Lena to help, but she joined them anyway, wanting to repay what she could never fully repay. Yet as her strength returned, the conflict sharpened. She feared that kindness could be misunderstood, that her presence might burden Talon with questions from settlers who saw only scandal where compassion lived. She imagined hearing her old neighbors whisper that she had betrayed her late husband by accepting shelter from a widowed Apache man. She reminded herself that she was a guest, not a promise, and that she must protect Talon from unwanted scrutiny. But every glance toward Naomi's hopeful eyes made her hesitation feel cruel. The girls depended on her warmth with a tenderness that neither asked nor demanded anything beyond presence. One afternoon, while gathering wood beside the stream, Lena confessed to Talon that she did not deserve the softness she had been given. Talon paused, considering the weight of her words. He told her that storms teach humility, not guilt, and that offering shelter did not chain her to obligation. Lena blinked against sudden tears. She admitted that loneliness had reshaped her heart so severely that comfort felt like trespass. Talon replied that the only trespass would be abandoning herself. The snow around them glowed beneath the early sun, and for a moment Lena felt as if the valley encouraged her to breathe without apology. Still, the fear of gossip sharpened her resolve. When evening settled, she explained to the girls that she might leave soon. Naomi stiffened and Mira burst into tears, clutching Lena's skirt as though the thought alone might steal her breath. Lena knelt and held them close, explaining that storms sometimes brought strangers together only long enough to remind them the world still held kindness. The girls did not understand such practicality. Naomi asked if kindness could not stay. Mira whispered that she would rather share Lena with distant family than lose her entirely. Lena kissed their foreheads and tasted salt from her own sadness. Talon listened quietly. He neither fought her decision nor dismissed it. He understood that every soul must choose the path that feels least burdensome. Yet he also understood his daughter's sorrow, for he had witnessed how loss imprinted children long before they learned to name grief. When bedtime arrived, the girls refused to sleep apart from Lena, curling beside her with trembling devotion. Lena stroked their hair until their breath steadied, though her own heart throbbed with uncertainty. The next morning arrived with silver light and a sky swept clean of storms. The mountains looked newly born, sharp and majestic beneath strips of rising mist. Lena saddled a small borrowed mare and packed her few belongings into a hide pouch. Naomi and Mira stood near the porch, refusing to speak, their faces colored by helplessness. Talon handed Lena a small pouch of dried food and a carved wooden charm representing safe passage. His hand brushed hers briefly, and warmth moved through Lena like a remembered summer. She mounted the horse, glancing at the cabin door she had entered half frozen and half defeated. She had not intended to stay long, yet leaving felt like tearing a thread she had not realized she needed. Talon bowed his head in silent blessing, and the girls embraced Lena's boots, begging her to visit again when the world felt kinder. As Lena rode away, the children sobbed in Talon's arms, watching her disappear between tall pines glowing beneath morning frost. Lena looked back once, gripping the reins tighter than necessary. She told herself her departure protected Talon, yet the sound of Naomi's distant cry pierced the morning air like something unfinished. Beneath that echo, Lena understood that returning to the world would not silence her longing. It would only remind her that some cabins feel like home long before the heart admits it. Spring unfurled across the valley with the confidence of a season, no longer afraid of winter's shadow. 4 years had passed since Lena rode away from Talon's cabin, leaving Naomi and Mira with tears that soaked into the morning frost. The valley had changed in small ways. New saplings sprang where storms had broken trees, and the cabin roof now held cedar shingles Talon added after the old ones surrendered to time. Naomi and Mira had grown into young girls with long limbs and quick minds, still carrying the tender patience Lena taught them in small secret ways. Talon often watched them reading by lamplight, and recognized how much of their gentleness had taken root during Lena's brief stay. Some evenings he caught himself gazing toward the old mountain trail, listening for the hoofbeat of a visitor no one expected. One bright afternoon, Talon was sharpening a skinning knife beside the porch when the younger mare lifted her head and snorted toward the treeline. Talon stood, wiping his palms on his trousers, sensing something unfamiliar approaching. Naomi stepped outside, shading her eyes against the sunlight. Mira followed, her braids swinging as she hurried down the steps. A lone rider moved slowly through the trees, keeping to narrow trails where wildflowers brushed against the horse's flanks. At first Talon assumed it was a trader or trapper passing through. But as the figure drew closer, he recognized the posture, the stillness of the shoulders, and the way the rider's hat tipped inward as though trying not to occupy too much space. Lena. The horse moved with a quiet gait, and Lena sat in the saddle with a dignity that had not been present 4 years earlier, when she left with trembling doubts. Her face still held softness, though her eyes carried a depth that belonged to a woman who had learned to weather disappointment without bitterness. Behind her, wrapped securely in a small carrier against her back, a toddler slept with peaceful hands curled against the fabric. The child's hair was dark, her cheeks plump from healthy nourishment. Lena's hand rested protectively on the child's leg, steadying her as the horse descended into the clearing. Naomi gasped and sprinted toward the rider, Mira trailing close behind. Lena dismounted without haste, lifting the little girl from her carrier with practiced ease before the horse could startle. Naomi reached Lena first and wrapped her arms around her waist, laughing and crying at once. Mira joined, clutching Lena's skirt with the same devotion she once displayed as a child of 8. Talon remained on the porch, allowing the reunion to unfold before stepping forward. Lena lifted her gaze toward him, and he felt something inside him settle, as though a long unanswered question had finally returned without explanation. Talon greeted her with the restrained warmth of a man aware of history's delicate threads. Lena spoke his name with a calm reverence, acknowledging time without apologizing for it. She held the sleeping child against her shoulder, and Naomi's eyes widened with curiosity. Mira observed with wonder, whispering that the little one must be very tired from traveling so far. Lena nodded and allowed them to touch the child's tiny hand. The toddler stirred, blinking up at strangers with the innocent trust of someone raised without fear. Naomi whispered her name, unsure whether speaking would wake her fully. Lena smiled. Her name is Olive. Talon guided them toward the cabin, helping Lena settle inside. The familiar smell of pine, herbs, and fresh bread greeted her like a memory preserved in wood grain. Naomi and Mira immediately rushed to prepare a place for Olive to nap, layering soft pelts near the hearth. Lena removed the child's boots and tucked her into a cradle Talon, once carved when Mira was small. Olive sighed and relaxed as though the cabin had claimed her without resistance. Lena sat near the window, hands folded in her lap. Talon poured tea and handed it to her without asking questions. She accepted with gratitude, inhaling the steam with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Outside, the hills shimmered beneath golden afternoon light, and Lena watched them with the comfort of someone who had finally returned to a place she once tried to forget for her own protection. Naomi and Mira hovered beside her, studying Olive's face as though trying to memorize each expression. Talon sensed Lena's hesitation. He understood that returning required courage, for time can widen or heal distance depending on one's memories. He asked gently if she had been treated well on the road. Lena let the question rest in silence before answering. Life taught her that softness is not granted freely everywhere. Some towns offered shelter but not belonging. She never stayed long enough to call any place home. She told Talon she had met good people, indifferent people, and people who imagined a woman with a child must have a husband she refused to mention. When she told the truth, that Olive's father had abandoned them before the child learned to speak, neighbors said pityingly that tragedy seemed to follow her like weather. Lena laughed without humor, and admitted she had grown weary of that narrative. Naomi and Mira listened with sympathetic eyes. Talon's jaw tightened slightly, though he spoke with measured calm. He asked if her brother had received her. She nodded, but sorrow clouded her expression. Her brother treated Olive kindly, yet his wife viewed Lena's circumstances as misfortune that might stain their reputation. After months of strained politeness, Lena left again. She rode toward places where no one felt entitled to judge the past she carried. Olive grew among trail songs and campfires, where strangers met them without insisting on explanations. The cabin felt heavier with each admission, not from discomfort but from the weight of unspoken possibilities. Talon understood that Lena did not return for convenience. She had come because some threads, once woven into the heart, never break. Naomi whispered that she wished Olive could stay, and Mira nodded eagerly. Lena pressed their hands, touched by the automatic acceptance the child received. Night began to settle through the rafters as shadows lengthened across the room. Talon lit a lamp, its glow painting Lena's face with gold. Olive stirred in her sleep and reached instinctively toward Talon's daughters, as though sensing belonging without introduction. Lena watched with growing tenderness, recognizing that the peacefulness in Olive's breathing felt different from anywhere else they had rested. As the lamp flame swayed, Lena looked into Talon's eyes with a vulnerability she had not allowed herself before. She whispered that the valley never stopped calling to her, even when she convinced herself she must not return. She paused, tracing Olive's small fingers against her palm. Some places remember the parts of us we forgot to protect. Talon held her gaze, quietly absorbing every word. And in the silence that followed, Lena finally admitted to herself that coming back was not a visit. It was a turning point. Evening drew itself across the valley like a velvet curtain, soft and unhurried, settling around the cabin with the familiarity of an old lullaby. Olive slept near the hearth in the cradle, her small breaths fluttering like moth wings against the wooden rails. Naomi and Mira sat nearby, whispering stories to each other until their eyelids surrendered to drowsiness. Talon added another log to the fire, and the room brightened with a gentle crackle that wrapped itself around Lena, like memory made visible. She sat near the window with her cup of cedar tea, feeling peace settle inside her body, with the same tenderness a child feels when held by someone trustworthy. Talon noticed the calm in her posture, and offered her a quiet smile that softened the space between them. When the girls finally drifted into sleep, Talon motioned for Lena to step outside with him into the cool night air. The sky shimmered with stars as familiar as freckles across an ancient face. Pines whispered against each other as the breeze carried their voices down the hillside. Lena wrapped herself in a shawl and followed Talon toward the porch. She loved the way nighttime made the valley feel untouched, as though her past mistakes lost their weight beneath the constellations. Talon leaned on the railing and studied the sky while Lena sat on the step, listening to the hush of the forest. Lena spoke first, admitting that returning to the cabin had frightened her more than giving birth alone, because she feared stirring emotions she had not learned how to name. Talon said she had nothing to fear here, and Lena smiled, though uncertainty flickered beneath her calm exterior. She told him the world outside had taught her how easily people confuse survival with scandal. Talon nodded, saying the world had always been louder than truth. Lena breathed deeply and felt something in her chest loosen, as though honesty itself had been waiting for permission. She reached for Talon's hand without planning to, and he allowed their fingers to intertwine without hesitation. His touch was steady and unwavering, grounding her with simple presence rather than persuasion. Lena whispered that she had carried the memory of his cabin like a lantern, during long winter nights when Olive cried from hunger, loneliness, or nightmares she could not understand. Talon lowered his gaze for a moment, absorbing the weight of her confession. Lena continued, admitting that she dressed Olive in second-hand blankets and whispered that love could be found even if one had been abandoned, because she never wanted the child to believe she owed the world an apology simply for existing. Talon listened with a reverence that made Lena feel seen rather than studied. He asked what had brought her back now, after 4 long years of wandering. Lena stared at the sky and whispered that she had become exhausted by transience. She grew weary of telling people she had somewhere else to go, even when she didn't. She said that every place she visited felt temporary, but the cabin never left her, as though it had been stitched into her memory with invisible thread. Talon reached over and brushed an errant lock of hair behind her ear with the tenderness of a man who understood the gravity of the moment. Lena trembled with relief, not romance, though romance slowly began to bloom beneath that relief. Talon spoke softly, revealing something he had never shared with the girls. After she left years ago, he searched the woods for days, believing she might have collapsed again or lost her way. He had not wanted the children to think that losing someone was simply natural. Lena looked at him with stunned disbelief, realizing the depth of responsibility he felt. Talon continued, saying he never told the girls because he did not want them to think compassion must always be accompanied by fear. But he confessed that he kept an extra lamp burning each night for weeks, a lamp placed on the porch as if guiding a traveler who might return unexpectedly. Lena pressed her hand against her heart as tears filled her eyes. Talon admitted that no matter how deeply he tried to bury the memory of her voice, something in him could not erase the quiet tenderness she left behind. Lena whispered that she had felt a similar tug, though she believed she had forfeited the right to revisit that tenderness. Talon shook his head and said that belonging is never forfeited when it is freely given. Lena covered her face with her palms, overcome by emotions she had spent 4 years refusing to acknowledge. The forest around them seemed to lean closer, as if listening. Talon stepped toward her and lifted her chin gently, asking if she still believed leaving had been the right choice. Lena admitted she had left not because she wanted distance, but because she feared ruining his reputation and robbing the girls of innocence. Talon smiled sadly, saying that reputation was a weaker fortress than kindness. He told her that what his daughters remembered most was the peace that had entered the house during the days Lena stayed. Lena whispered she wished she had stayed longer, wished she could have helped raise the girls, wished fear had not driven her away. Talon placed her hand against his chest and told her that love had lived quietly inside him since the moment he carried her through the storm, though he never allowed himself to speak it because she deserved safety before she deserved affection. Lena stared at him with disbelief, her breaths turning uneven. Talon continued, confessing that he had loved her gently, silently, the way a man loves the memory of sunlight after months of grief. He told her that every kindness she offered the girls healed something inside his family that he had thought would remain broken forever. Lena leaned into him without hesitation and whispered that she had never expected love again, yet she found herself learning how to feel it in the absence of promises. Talon kissed her forehead and whispered that he did not want absence anymore. He asked her whether she wished to stay, not because the world had pushed her here, but because her heart had chosen it. Lena felt Olive stir inside the cabin and smiled. She whispered that staying was no longer a question she needed time to answer. She wanted Olive to grow where love was not conditional, and where home did not require apology. Talon wrapped his arms around her, and she exhaled years of fear into his shoulder. Snow began to drift through the night sky again, soft as blessing, yet no one felt cold. Inside the cabin, Olive murmured in her sleep, and Naomi unconsciously reached for her small hand, offering warmth without knowing she did. Talon whispered that love was not the end of the story, only the beginning neither of them dared believe they deserved until this very night.